Today we're going to look at migrating an application in 15 minutes. I have with me Sean Masters, who's our senior system engineer, and he'll be taking us through a demo in just a couple of slides. A couple of things I want to cover before we move on from the first slide. One is absolutely please ask questions. So if you look in the interface, the red interface for GoToWebinar, that popped up for me on the right-hand side of my screen. There's a questions tab there. Please use that and type in questions. And then the second thing that I like to point out, of course, are all our awards. So you can see that when we released our product, which was in August of 2011, at that following VMworld, we got Best of Show and also the Gold Award for Business Continuity and Data Protection. And we have continued to add awards and some recognition to that. And we just added a Gartner Cool Vendor recognition this month. So if we take a look at what data center migrations look like typically, they're not easy. Several customers I've spoken with that have used Zerto Virtual Replication for migration talk about literally doing a forklift upgrade. So they're going to have a storage array next to the one that they want to migrate. They load all the data up, and then they ship it to a new site. Kingfisher IT, they actually provided us a quote for the webinar, and also within a case study, you'll see that. They were migrating from an older infrastructure, and they had come across a couple of issues just because with an older infrastructure, you get surprises. So once they started using Zerto for the migration, they found it to be much, much easier. And also just generally, data center moves are, maybe something that you've done once in your career, a handful of times. So that can lead to some unexpected complications because you haven't run into this issue several times, and now you know what the best practice is. It's something that has occurred to maybe one other time or two other times, and both of those times a different thing actually fixed what happened during the migration. So the impact of a data center migration is significant. So revenue and productivity can be lost because applications have to be unavailable for an extended period of time. You also risk losing that data and application throughout the move. And professional services can help, but they're traditionally expensive. And they're usually, several months in terms of the engagement. So if you're hiring experts, 1 or 2 or maybe up to 4 or 5, I don't know how large your data center is, for 4 to 8 months, that can be very, very expensive in terms of the services engagement. So with Zerto, we can simplify the process and reduce the time and effort it takes to migrate your applications. Downtime is reduced to minutes. And Sean's going to show you that in the demonstration because I know it's probably pretty hard to believe that, but I can also point you to many customer references, and we have those a little later on in the presentation. Migrating a VM is simple. It's literally point and click move. You can migrate at the VM level, so you can migrate specific virtual machines if you don't want to migrate the whole array. And we can automatically re-IP and do boot order and things like that at the target site. One of the things that really helps Zerto in terms of a migration is support for heterogeneous environments. So when you're migrating something, from, say, an EMC array to a NetApp array, that can be a very extensive process. With Zerto, because we are in the Hypervisor and looking at the information at that level, that migration is very simple for us. So I'm going to run through the architecture really quick just so you can see the components that will be used. So here we have a very simple overview of the architecture, and I say simple because here we have 2 sites, and Zerto can support replication between multiple sites. So we have the Zerto Virtual Manager. That's the only piece of software that you'll touch, and it plugs right into vCenter Server. We do also have a standalone VM client. On each ESX host, you'll put a Zerto Virtual Replication Appliance This is what's going to actually replicate the data from your source site to your target site. So I already mentioned the replicate anything to anything, really a great strength of Zerto in a migration scenario. Highly scalable with the Zerto Virtual Replication Appliance being on each host. The RPO of seconds, so it's continuous block level replication. So in a DR scenario, that gives you a very aggressive service level. In terms of a migration scenario, you're going to be able to sync your data to that target site at a pretty good pace. Now, of course, that is dependent on the bandwidth that you allocate to Zerto Virtual Replication, the pipe that you have available, how much storage you're replicating, how much information you're replicating. So all of those things are factors. So if you do decide to use Zerto for disaster recovery, we do have something called a journal. So that's 1 hour up to 5 days worth of data. So you can roll things back for logical corruption. So we did a webinar a couple weeks ago with one of our customers, Sam Rainey from the Commercial Food Service Repair Incorporated. And he mentioned that he had someone put a 20 amp breaker on a 30 amp line, and so their stack just went down. So you can recover pretty easily from silly things like that that happen from time to time. And we also have some bandwidth optimization, so this will help in accelerating the syncing to your target site so we can do compression and throttling. So the virtual protection group, this is a group of VMs that supports a particular application. So you'll have like a database server, application server, and a web server. So you can put those all together in a group. So for example, at the migration level, you might want to group together SAP or Exchange, SharePoint, SQL, etc. So all the applications that you're looking to migrate, you'd put each one in their own virtual protection group. This is where you'd also configure the re-IPing and the boot order, things like that. In a DR scenario, this is what enables you to continue to leverage some of the really cool features of VMware like GRS and VMotion and things like that. Because Zerto is aware of, hey, no matter where these VMs go, they're all part of this virtual protection group, but we need to make sure we meet this particular SLA. So the automation, so this is what makes the move so fast. So once you hit the arrow to failover, or in this case move, Zerto is automatically going to start to build those virtual machines. And because you have specified boot order, re-IP, all those other steps that we've discussed, this is really, really fast, minutes. And we have several examples of that. If you do use this for disaster recovery, click to test anytime. So you can test during business hours, during the test. Replication is still happening. The applications are still protected. And if, in the off chance, during one of your disaster recovery tests, an issue occurs and you have to fail over, you can stop the test and do that. And then we have an offsite cloning feature, so you can create an exact copy of a particular application for things like backup or test and development. Okay, so now I'm going to make Sean the presenter. And he'll walk you through a demo. So it's coming your way.
Awesome. Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
Just let me know when this shows up. Look good?
I don't see it yet.
Okay.
So, we can take a couple of questions. So one I can answer right off the bat. So someone said, can you migrate physical to virtual? We cannot. Right now we support VMware vSphere only. And the follow-up, the same person asked, can the ESXi, can you have different hypervisors? So for example, 5.1 to 5.5, yes, that's true. I think the minimum, and Sean will know this, is it 4.1 or 4.0 update? What's the minimum?
Yeah, so our minimum requirement, great question. We support ESX 4.0 update 1 all the way up through the latest version of ESXi 5.5 update 3 and everything in between.
Yeah, and so you can do migrations between those different hypervisors. So if you're going 4.0 to 5.0 or 5.1 to 5.5, that's supported. And Sean, I can see your screen, and everybody else can too.
Beautiful. All right. So kind of going to do a move here real quick and then show you what actually makes up the virtual protection group. So what I moved and where it was going and so on. If we look at the bottom right side of the screen, though, we see a move button, test button, live failover button, and so on. So this move, what this is actually going to do is allow me to select any of my virtual protection groups. In this case, I'm going to pick this one named ZCM. It's going from my Dallas site to my Boston site, which we'll tab over to in a moment. I can click Next. Now we get a few options here as well. And I want to show you a really quick migration, but I also want to kind of point out two of these options. For shutdown, should be fairly self-explanatory, but we do have this commit policy and then this reverse protection feature. The commit policy, really what this lets you do is say, let's do this migration, but for up to 24 hours, and I'm just going to give myself 30 minutes here, but for up to 24 hours, what we can actually do is hold off on configuring for failback. And what you get out of that in exchange is actually an undo button. So if you do this migration and for whatever reason you're unhappy with the result, you can actually just click undo. Zerto will roll back the whole migration like it never happened, immediately allowing you to try again after that. And reverse protection, just to the right of that, is our ability to automatically configure for failback. Right? So the point there being that once you configure your migration plan or your recovery plan once, we don't ever want you having to tinker with that again in the future, so we just take care of that for you. Now, what the move is actually going to do here is gracefully shut down the protected virtual machine, in this case, the ZCM, here in my vSphere inventory. And then it's going to finalize replication. And then, and only then, once we're sure the VM is powered off and once we're sure that everything's replicated, are we actually going to bring the virtual machine online at the target site.
We can take questions while we wait for that to happen. So someone asked, is the main message of this presentation, Zerto is great for one-time migration as well as disaster recovery. So Zerto is great for any kind of migrations that you have. You know, maybe you have many of them. That's perfectly fine. But the original goal of Zerto is disaster recovery, and that's what the project was designed for. And then it kind of bubbled up as we were first out of the gate. Some of our customers saying, hey, I use this for data center migration, something that would normally take me 4 or 5 months. I did, you know, with a week of replication and then moved it in about an hour. So that was kind of how the migration message came about, was our customers using it for that purpose.
Excellent. Actually, I think there was, so that move, you can see we created the virtual machine at the bottom of the screen. We're doing some reconfiguration to it, basically moving files around to make sure that we can, in fact, turn on this actual virtual machine now that it's been migrated. Right? And you can see it usually does take a couple of minutes here. What I wanted to see is, that's what I had thought. Okay. So there's a great question here around seeding the remote storage ahead of time. So with Zerto, we actually give you the option. Whenever you set up a virtual protection group, which we'll actually take a quick look at in just a moment here, you will actually be able to either have Zerto do all the initial synchronization for you, or you can point us at any kind of copy of the data that you have at the target site already. Maybe you took a local backup, threw it on a NAS or some other storage device, maybe USB even, and shipped it over to the target site. You can point us at the target data, and we'll use that instead of synchronizing everything over the WAN to make it less of a bandwidth-intensive operation, more of just checking the disk to make sure we have what we think we have. So what I'm doing now is clicking into the virtual protection group now that it's been migrated. And I apologize to my colleague here for the technical difficulties. I think I have one of the older, slower laptops in the company. So my connection's a little slow here. But this will come up in a moment. And really what we'll see is the virtual protection group will be sitting in a move before commit state. And we will also see that undo button. Just clicking over here. So we'll see this move before commit stage show up, and we can see that we do have a rollback button, which is our undo button, as well as commit, which will finalize everything. And again, in terms of finalizing, we've already done the migration, but you can see the original source VM is sitting in production, powered off. So part of the commit will be to remove that, clean that up, remove it from the underlying data stores and so on, and of course also to kick off all of our failback configuration as well. Otherwise, I could hit rollback, maybe I'm unhappy with the move, and I can undo everything that Zerto just did. Yeah, let's see if we have, we'll just let that commit. Question here on the, actually on the UI. So, sorry, my questions pane keeps minimizing. So basically, how can I access the Zerto user interface? So a few ways here. You can see the plugin does plug right into the vSphere client, sometimes affectionately referred to as the vSphere FAT client. We do also plug into the vSphere web client as well. It's the same exact user interface there. You can also access the Zerto Virtual Manager, which is the interface we're looking at here, through the web. So we also give you that capability as well. Really, however you want to manage Zerto, we will find a way for you to do that. There was another question while we're looking at the virtual protection group here updating and committing itself. After automating the processes with Zerto, what else might a customer need to do manually? For example, IP to redirection, DNS changes, and so on. So with Zerto, we can actually handle IP reconfiguration for you for Windows Server, for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and then for a few Linux distributions as well. We can also do some disk reconfiguration, and really the only thing after that would be for the client end to get some kind of DNS refresh so that the client DNS tables were pointing to any new IP addresses. Sorry. To show you what a virtual protection group looks like here, and there are quite a few drop-downs we can see, but I'm just going to kind of high-level things. So outside of the migration perspective, from a protection perspective, ongoing BCDR, you can see in the top left of the screen here, is the SLA. So you do get to define a service level to adhere to within Zerto. All right. On the right side, you then define the targets. So where do you want to actually put the VMs? What compute, what storage, what networks, and so on. Right? Although we show hosts and data stores here, by the way, I will point out that you can target host clusters and resource pools. You can also target data stores and data store clusters. And we then fully support VMotion, storage VMotion, HA, DRS, SDRS, and actually more vSphere functionality as well at both the source and the target site. You can control boot order and boot delay, although with one VM in this group, I won't waste anyone's time. You can also have Zerto execute scripts at the bottom of the screen here. You see that we will execute scripts for you. Anything you might do today when you recover from a backup, for example, a cleanup script or anything else you can think of, we will do that. You can also configure per VM granular settings. Maybe an individual virtual machine needs to go to a specific host cluster or resource pool, specific storage. Maybe an individual volume needs specific targets as well, or you want us to bypass it for replication altogether. And of course, you can also do NIC reconfigurations, which, as I mentioned, do require a Windows Server OS or a Red Hat Enterprise OS. You can see if those aren't supported on the VM in question, we'll actually just say, hey, this isn't a supported guest OS. Make sure that this is running one of those. All right. Otherwise, and I always like showing the one way and the other way, you will get this, which is the actual IP reconfiguration. You see by default we will do nothing, which can also be used to support stretch layer 2 environments, of course. Otherwise, you can come in here and change to a DHCP or static target, and we'll apply that on migration.
All right, so we have a couple of questions. So Sean, this one I think is for you. So must there be a one-to-one mapping of source and target VMs in a VPG?
Good question. So one virtual machine can be in one virtual protection group at any time. And of course, virtual protection groups can contain many virtual machines that make up the application as well. Because the virtual protection group is also a data consistency group, what we're doing inside the virtual protection group is not only replicating changes on those VMs independently, but we're actually keeping track of all the changes as well so that we achieve write order fidelity, also known as write consistency, actually at an intra-VM level, which is very unique in the industry as well. But because of that mechanism, we need to maintain a single VM in a single VPG at any given time. Great question.
Okay, and then someone wants to know, is it possible to use Zerto as a hot site or a load balanced data center?
So great question. I think there is there's a difference between an active-active, say, availability solution and then an active-active data center solution, right? So you may have two production data centers that are using each other as targets for replication and recovery, and I have customers who do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They use Zerto to rebalance workloads between their two production data centers. That way they don't have maybe a cold site sitting there just costing them money, right? So they get to expand production out into that second site. The other way to look at that may be in more of an availability situation. You have two buildings right across the street from each other with application availability and load balancing and stuff. And that would be an uptime solution versus our more business continuity DR solution. But I do think they both really have their place as well.
And then someone asks, any plans for Microsoft Hyper-V? So if you saw our press release in February, we actually do have plans to add another Hypervisor in 2014. So and that's something that we're looking into.
Excellent.
All right, so I think Sean's all set with the demo. I'm going to take back the presenter controls, and while I'm doing that, we'll take a few more questions. So Sean, for you, can Zerto do SAN replication?
Good question. We actually do our own hypervisor-based near real-time replication. So it's near real-time all the time at the VM and VMDK and RDM level. So we don't tie out into array replication. We also don't use VM snapshots, for example. Those are both good solutions to their relevant problems. We think we have a better, faster, more efficient way to do things with Zerto.
Okay, and then and I can answer those questions. Someone said, using Zerto as a DR appliance, what is the overhead to the ESXi machine for replication? So we've done some benchmark testing there. It's about 2 to 5% overhead. I can tell you I was presenting at the VTUG in January with Dwayne Dumont from Next Stage Medical, who said they didn't even notice when they installed it. So it depends on your environment, where your system looks like, but most of the customers that I talk to, and I run our reference program, so I've spoken with almost 20% of our customers, they said we barely notice it in terms of the overhead. So. And then, Sean, a question for you. I think you answered, but I want to make sure we answer all the questions.
Sure.
What happens after migration? Does your app changes IP and names of destination machines?
Oh, okay. Yeah, excellent question. So the great thing with Zerto here is that you can protect an application. You can click move, And we can purposefully, if you want us to not do anything, we can not do anything besides move the virtual machines to that other site. Alternatively, you get complete control over that recovery plan. So you can tell us the exact host and storage to put the virtual machines on, the networks, the IP addresses, the scripts to execute, and so on, so that you really get complete control over that migration one way or the other.
Okay, great. And then someone says, can we do VMware to HyperV migration and do support Microsoft Azure? And the answer to both of those questions is not yet. And someone says, we have standalone ESX i4X systems. Can we use Zerto to migrate? Sorry if I missed it.
Sure. So that sounds to me maybe like the ESXi3 Hypervisor edition. So while we don't care about the vSphere version, 4.0 update 1 or later, we also don't care about the VMware licensing, whether it's Enterprise Plus, replicating, or migrating to even developer licensing. However, I will say the one thing we do care about is we will require at least one vCenter. All of those hosts involved in replication and migration and recovery do need to be managed by a vCenter server.
Okay, and I think we've gotten to all the questions except this one, and it's, do you need a Zerto appliance on each site? The Zerto Virtual Application Appliance, so you actually need one on each ESX host, and then as Sean just mentioned, a vCenter server. Okay, so if I missed your question, I'm really sorry. If you wouldn't mind typing in again, because we got a lot of questions, which is fantastic. Yep, so here's someone, I did see this one before and we did not answer it, so I will ask Sean. I'm new to virtualization. How is this different compared to VMotion? So his question, he asked that before and I missed it.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So a VMotion is really doing one of two things, one of which we're very similar to, and the other which, of course, we're different from. So one thing VMotion can be used to do is to move a live virtual machine between hosts. Those hosts must be in close physical proximity, so they have to be usually right next to each other, and you can move the VM really without shutting it down. Right? So that's typically used for maybe shifting workloads around or doing host maintenance on the different hosts in your production site. The other thing that you could use vMotion to do is actually to move a powered-off virtual machine, it would be called a cold vMotion, over to maybe a little bit more distant of a host. Right? What we're doing and how we're different is we're actually letting you protect, replicate, and migrate that, not just that VM, but the VM and any other virtual machines that are related. So with a vMotion, you might move an individual VM. Maybe it runs a web server. With Zerto, you may run the entire e-commerce platform in a single protection group that you then migrate the entire application with the click of the button.
Okay, great. So I think that's all the questions, and now we're going to move on to a couple more slides that I just wanted to share with you. So one, as you can see from our customers, they do use Zerto for migrations. So Kingfisher IT, they were migrating systems from France back into the UK, and they were talking about months to complete this. For them, just as you saw with Sean, they just selected the machines and migrated them over, and they couldn't believe how fast it was. Fujitsu, he's migrating systems from customers that are operating a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week kind of business, and they were able to cut over their applications in about 15 minutes. So for them, again, really a great savings in terms of the time. And then Jamie Williams with Tankata. So he was migrating a 30-gigabyte ERP app from California to Georgia, and he originally told the owner of that application it would take about a week to move that over. And with Zerto, he did it on Friday at about 5 o'clock, and by about 10 past 5, he was done. So they were really much happier with that scenario versus the 1 week of not having access to the application. So a couple other features. So you already saw this with John, the interface, so it's not as exciting now that you've seen it already. But we do have a vCenter plugin and a browser-based module, so enabling management from anywhere. We do support replication between multiple sites. We do have customers replicating around the world. I can think of a local customer that's replicating from Waltham to the UK. We have another customer that's replicating from Texas to Dubai. And then, of course, we have people that are replicating, I don't know how familiar you are with Massachusetts, but between Methuen and Marlborough. So that's like 50 miles apart. So, certainly people are doing things close together, far apart, and Zerto is able to tolerate all those separate scenarios. And then, of course, if you are looking into a cloud provider for anything, Zerto has partnerships with approaching 150 cloud providers around the world, names like Colt, BlueLock, Island, Terramark. So if you were interested in doing anything with a cloud provider, as you can imagine, they like this migrate the application into their environment in about 10 minutes type of scenario. For some reason, my slide is not advancing. Okay, so with Forest National Bank, so this is a disaster recovery use case. So for them, they were replicating at the LUN level. Once they moved to Zerto and they were able to replicate in the hypervisor, they were able to reduce their bandwidth and storage requirements. So I think that was really eye-opening to them because they didn't realize, how much they could really get back by replicating at the VM level. And then Hapo Community Credit Union, so this is a kind of a smaller credit union in the Pacific Northwest. And even though they were kind of smaller with financial records, they had to store absolutely everything. So they were going to their board pretty much annually and saying, hey, we need to buy this much storage for this year to support our growing environment. And their storage footprint went from 70 terabytes to 40 terabytes. And they went to their board and say, yeah, we don't know when we're going to need to buy storage again. So that was quite a savings for them as well. So I'm going to move through this kind of quickly just because coming to talk about migrations, disaster recovery might not be your top priority. But we do support disaster recovery in a private cloud environment where you own both sites, both corporate data centers. As I mentioned, you could do disaster recovery as a service to a cloud provider. It's a great way to evaluate a cloud provider because it really puts them through the paces versus like a backup as a service where you're copying the data to the cloud provider maybe nightly. This is continuous replication and they have to have things available quickly. So it can give you a great deal of comfort that you can maybe move a production application into the cloud provider's infrastructure. And if you do get that level of comfort, I'm sure everyone can think of one application that they would love to never have to manage again. Give the cloud provider that one. So and here's some of the other cloud providers I mentioned we have great relationships with. And then lastly, we're virtual aware, enterprise class automation in terms of replication recovery and data center migrations. And it's really simple and easy to use. So we can help you with your public cloud, your private cloud, or your hybrid cloud objectives. So that's all I had in terms of content, but I am going to go back and see if I have any questions. And yes, we do. Okay, so I see that Sean's answering them privately, but the whole audience might want to know the answer, so I'm going to read them out loud, and you can answer them again. So someone asked, at the disaster recovery site, if I went to clone the VM, does the production site VM have to be turned off, or can we leave it on?
And this is a great question, and I have been jumping on to some of these, answering them privately, because, well, I'm a nerd and I like doing that. So really, when you do a clone with Zerto, the clone is a completely isolated operation, so it doesn't impact production, doesn't impact replication. You can leave production VMs online or shut them down, really totally up to you. There is actually a follow-up question to that, if you don't mind me taking it, Jennifer. What does the clone really do? Right? Does it just clone a VM? Does it allow you to execute a whole recovery plan? So a clone in Zerto is really a full disk copy using the replicated data, so it doesn't impact production at all. It then leaves the cloned VMs in a powered off state, so you can take those off network, do any changes you need to do. A lot of times things like changing IP addresses aren't enough. You need to change MAC addresses, host names, SIDs in Windows, stuff like that. There's more to copying a VM in the real world, right, than we usually think about. But because we clone to a powered off state, we make sure that you have the ability to then take that somewhere else, take it off network, take it off disk, whatever that might be, so you can make the necessary changes before putting it into production.
Okay, great. That was actually the only other new question that we had. Oh, so this is a question that we get pretty much every single webinar. And it's, what makes Zerto different from SRM? And the answer is many, many things. So everybody sit down. This is a long answer. Okay, first, SRM is just an orchestration tool. So you need to use something else to replicate the data. So you'll either use vSphere replication or race replication. And depending what route you go, that is going to impact what goes on in your environment. So for example, the wood forest example that I gave you where they're replicating LUNs with an SRM kind of solution, they did a lot of checking back and forth, and they ended up kind of losing some of the efficiencies that they gained with virtualization. So you decide, okay, well, I'm going to go the vSphere replication route instead. The issue there is the replication, the RPO at best will be 15 minutes. And that might be fine for some of your applications, but if we're talking about production workloads, which are the workloads that we are looking at, we really, you're going to need to have an RPO of 15 seconds, 30 seconds, something like that. And I don't know if you noticed it during the demo, but Sean's RPOs are right around 3 seconds. And we have customers who are 8 seconds, coast to coast, that kind of thing. And then, Sean, other things that are different, SRM?
The biggest thing for me, having been an SRM customer, and then I have to admit, before I was at Zerto, I was at a value-added reseller, and one of my product lines was VMware vSphere, so SRM as well. One of the big things is the care and feeding. So, you've heard Jen and myself talk about how Zerto works with any of the VMware vSphere 4.0 and higher. That actually extends through the whole environment. So every single host can be running a different build, patch, upgrade, you name it, and we keep replicating, recovering, migrating, everything else without a hiccup. And of course, all the licensing can be different. So you don't have to manage and maintain the infrastructure environment just to manage and maintain your DR solution, right? The point of DR, whether we like it or not, working for Zerto, is that you set it up and then you kind of forget about it until you test, a couple times a year, and hope you never need it too, right? The other big thing, certainly for me, was always the ability to do testing. And testing in Zerto, we only talk about it for maybe a minute or two, but at the end of the day, it is just insane night and day difference between other solutions out there. The fact that I can click a button in Zerto to do live failover testing without impacting production at all, but also without pausing or shutting off my replication. So really the two big issues today in testing from a backup solution or an array replication solution are either we've got to stop production or disconnect production or something like that, or we need to pause or halt or break replication, and sometimes we have to do both. And all three of those are terrible, terrible options. You shouldn't have to impact production or violate your replication plans just to do tests, and with Zerto you don't have to.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'll add to that, so as part of the customer reference program, so I do a 1-hour interview with all our customers. And one of the questions is, what made you look at a new BCDR solution? Did something happen in your environment? Was there, a new rule that came your way? What was it that made you start looking at BCDR? And for a couple of our customers, it is our administrator left the company. And no one else knows how to use it because that's how hard it is to use. So, they look, we have 3 options. So we can hire an SRM admin, one of us can learn how to use it, or we can get something that's easy enough for all of us to use. And for a fair number of our customers, that's what it is. It's not that, you can do some of the same things, but it's a lot easier with Zerto. And as Sean mentioned, the kind of set it and forget it. You know, a lot of our customers come in like, you know, I just leave the Zerto GUI up on one of my 3 screens, and I just kind of watch it during the day. I'll look over, make sure it's replicating and things like that. And if it's not, you'll get an alert, and then you know that you need to go and look at it. So it's really, really easy. And I know you probably hear that a lot from a lot of people, but I can put you in touch with many, many reference customers who will say the exact same thing. So we don't have any other questions coming in right now. So I'm going to give it another minute. But if you do want to email myself or Sean, so my email is just jennifer@zerto.com. Very, very easy. Sean's is Sean M, S-E-A-N-M @zerto.com. And if you have any other questions for us, let us know. Love to do a proof of concept with you. This product installs in under an hour, and you can be replicating. So we'd love to have a chat with you if you're interested in trying out the product. So thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, and have a great day.